for item number 11, which is the adoption of the revenue and financing policy. I'll just get that moved first. Councillor Clow, would you like to move the recommendation? Do we have a seconder for that?
I'll second.
The Deputy Mayor is seconded. And Andrew, if you'd like to speak to the paper, please.
This paper recommends the adoption of the revenue and financing policy as amended to reflect the funding decisions the Council made on the 31st of May, which then set the basis for the funding laid out in the long-term plan.
Right, that was brief. Plenty of room for questions if there's something that you missed on the paper. Questions from councillors, first of all, please. What we're doing, of course, is it's the policy set out in attachment A. So, Councillor Darby.
Just a small one. Can I take you to 140, top of that, a reference to regional fuel tax? It refers to the RFT being used to fund capital expenditure and limiting it to that. That's the way it's reads there. That's not my understanding. My understanding that there's operational costs that have an RFT contribution. So I don't want to box ourselves in by having that definition, if I am correct.
So the sources of funding set out in the... I don't have the agenda, I've just got a draft of the policy here.
Okay.
So the table sources of funding for operating expenditure and the draft revenue and financing policy has regional fuel tax as the last row, and it's also on the sources of funding for capital expenditure.
That's not what it says.
Yep, I think we've just had confirmation from our Chief Financial Officer. Matthew, do you want to support that?
So through the chair, I just think we're confirming, but I think I'm supporting you, Andrew. I think the point you're making is it's in both tables. So what the policy is saying is we may use the regional fuel tax according to our revenue financing policy for both capital expenditure and operating expenditure. That's all that we're saying.
And that was confirmed in discussions with the Minister. That's the point that we got to. Any further questions? Councillor Daniel Newman.
Thank you. Andrew, can I just ask, how easy is it to make an amendment to the policy partway through the next financial year in the event of external issues beyond our control requiring a change? And I refer to the accommodation provider target rate.
If we were going to change the revenue and financing policy, and we would need to consult as appropriate for the scale of the change, and then if that, then the degree of consultation, then it would then also depend whether there were going to be changes to other aspects of the finances and the long-term plan as to the nature of change we would then have to make as well. So it'd be a matter of scale, would determine the nature of the consultation.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? If not, Councillor Watson.
Sorry, just through you and to you, Mr. Mayor, just wondering which item is the most appropriate one to address a number of concerns, well, not concerns, but questions and related comments to do with the fuel tax, and I don't mean in the sense of relitigating it, but going forward, would it be this item or the next item?
I think this item would be appropriate. Next item, I'm advised that, but this does cover the broad area. So I think Andrew, Andrew's here for both of those. So you can do it under the next item if you'd prefer. Okay. Are there any comments? We'll come to the comments section. If not, it's been... Sorry, Chairman, Councillor Fletcher.
I would be remiss if I didn't draw attention to my deep concern over the flawed process, in my opinion, that has accompanied the targeted accommodation rate from the beginning, from the initial discussion that we had in the annual plan last year. And whilst we only consulted on the modifications to try and bring bed and breakfast and so forth into the same world, to me, two wrongs don't make a right. I continue to feel that we have made some major errors, and I think that there is going to be a high level of administration associated with this. We still don't know the numbers of people that are going to be impacted. So in terms of compliance with it, the administration, in terms of banks for bucks, I am not persuaded that this is a good policy, and I will be voting against it.
Thank you, Councillor. Just to remind councillors that actually I had directly from the regional manager of Airbnb his agreement that this was the appropriate thing to do, and that we have agreement from the hotel and motel industry that bringing Airbnb into line with other accommodation providers creates a level playing field. I probably don't need to remind councillors, but what we're doing this year is not dealing with the substantive policy. I know the Councillor Fletcher and others have some concerns about that. It is purely to do with Airbnb, and this is a policy challenge that is being faced not so much on a targeted rate on accommodation, but on the question of business versus residential rates in almost every council around the country where that is becoming a significant factor. Airbnb is a big accommodation provider, and we have to, whether it's on ordinary rating policy, business versus residential, or in our case, an accommodation targeted rate as well, we have to address that question to ensure equity in how we deal with providers. But take on board, Councillor, your acknowledged opposition to that.
Thank you for that, Your Worship, because fundamental to this, and I can understand if this was a policy that had been worked through and agreed, we are going to bring these other accommodation providers into it. But what we are doing is rolling over those geographical zones that were determined during the annual plan last year, and I think are inequitable, and I don't think they are substantiated in terms of the explanations that have been given to us. So it's for that reason I think it's flawed.
Yep. And I think the advice that Andrew has previously given us that if we want to look at that again, the next appropriate occasion will probably be in the annual plan for next year. Okay, are there any other comments? If not, I'll put the resolution. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no.
No.
Carried. Would you like
Yes,
I think Councillor Fletcher's opposition recorded for the reasons that she has spelled out.